Welcome, ladies non-binaries and gentlemen, to a Zelda Timeline in a nutshell. The other Zelda tubers all garner very many views from their timeline videos, so I shall do likewise. Be sure to absolutely smash those like, subscribe, and bell buttons as if they were Helmrock King's face. Tears of the Kingdom is nearly upon us, so it'll be good to get up to speed on the series timeline. It's complex and convoluted. The timeline I'm presenting right now is the official timeline taken from the book Hyrule Encyclopedia, itself being derived from the earlier book Hyrule Historia. After the creation of the world by the Golden Goddesses, the first game on it is Skyward Sword, consistently marketed as the prettiest of quills. Zelda is a reincarnation of the goddess Hylia, who gave up her immortality to use the Triforce, and Link is a reincarnation of the first Link, who died fighting Demise. Hey, what's 4 times cuter than Toon Link? That's right, 4 Toon Links. The next games shown are the quadruplicating tales of Minish Cap and Four Swords, starring Vaati as the villain, who wants to marry Zelda. These were formerly the earliest tales in the series until Skyward Sword came along. And our unified first section of the timeline is finished with the great and famous Ocarina of Time, picking up the unsubtle foreshadowing from the end of Skyward Sword and introducing the recurring villain Ganondorf. Ganondorf is a German-Irish multi-ethnic name, the Irish part meaning something like son of the blonde one, and Dorf of course being German for village, so might I posit the theory that his father was blonde, and his mother was obviously combined twin Rova. But time travel leads to some antics. When Time Link defeated Ganon and time traveled away, he left the adult timeline with no hero to prevent Ganon's return, leading to Wind Waker and its direct sequels Phantom Hourglass and Spirit Tracks. I would also like to say that Wind Waker Link is the coolest Link, because unlike the other Links, he wasn't chosen by the gods to save Zelda, he just wanted to save his sister, and was so badass that he made the gods choose him, only going to save Zelda after meeting and forming a personal relationship with her. They then establish a kingdom of trains, even cooler. But 7 years ago, Time Link arrives in the slightly inaccurately depicted child timeline to warn Zelda about what Ganondorf was going to do. Really, the time travel should loop around and effectively bypass Ocarina of Time, because the entire point of the child timeline is that most of Ocarina of Time never happened. The only person on the child timeline who experienced the events of Ocarina of Time was Link. After reliving his first meeting with Zelda, according to the book, Time Link selfishly deemed actually catching Ganondorf to be a them problem for the rest of Hyrule to deal with, as while the Gorons were starving, he instead spent months looking for Navi. That's the premise of Majora's Mask. He later dies not passing down his secret sword skills to his children, and as a ghost laments the fact that he was not remembered as a hero. Wait, that can't be right. He never says anything of that sort in Twilight Princess. What he actually said was that his biggest regret was not passing down his skills. Lots of people in Twilight Princess indicate that he was remembered, so what's going on here? But moving on, the next game on the child timeline is Four Swords Adventure? What? Why? Is this because of that reference to a dark tribe being sealed in a mirror? But the game's intro says it's soon after the first Four Swords, after only a brief period of peace. This puts it nowhere near that. How can centuries with multiple extremely violent wars ever be construed as a period of peace brief enough to be ended with a word like until? Something is clearly afoot with this timeline. But surely Four Swords Adventure, in which Ganon gets his iconic trident, and you meet the creators of Bombos and Quake, has many important games after it, right? Right? Nope. A Link to the Past, according to the books, is a game over in the final battle of Ocarina of Time, because early in development, Ocarina of Time was intended to be the Imprisoning War. That's a surprise. So, let's unpack what both games say happened. Link to the Past says that Ganondorf accidentally opened the Sacred Realm, found the Triforce within, and successfully made his wish. And the Imprisoning War was fought to buy the Seven Sages enough time to close the door behind him so it couldn't escape. Because if Ganon is ever in the overworld with the full Triforce, he'd be literally unstoppable. In Ocarina, however, literally the exact opposite happens. The Triforce gets split, and when Ganon defeats Link, he gets full power in the overworld. So he should be unstoppable at that point, but somehow the sages manage to push him through the door anyways? That already breaks the entire premise of Link to the Past. We can't hope to write accurate theories in fanworks when we have to contend with all this widespread misinformation in our way. It detracts from a general understanding. This is who the F40PH was responsible for this dissatisfactory and contradictory material. They must be stopped, that's for sure. Oh, I see. Nobody who wrote the books was actually on the Zelda team. Monster Maze's video only talks about the process of translating it to English, the second round of a game of telephone, and doesn't mention the blatant contradictions, or that Aonuma has said that nobody on the Zelda team wants to read the books. And these authors have shown in their work that they aren't quite the airtight definitive source they claim to be, and are willing to just make things up when they get confused. Look here, Historia's bad at wrong, and Encyclopedia somehow managed to make Historia's bad timeline wronger. They swapped Oracles and Awakening for literally no explanation, introducing many new contradictions to solve an apparent contradiction that wasn't even contradictory in the first place, and different rounds of printing don't even agree on whether the Oracles are the same link as Link to the Past or not. I can make a more consistent timeline than any of these fools. And I might not have the fancy visuals other timelines do, but I'll do it, yes, with my own fan games, a brand new sentence, and an accusation of murder. Welcome, ladies non-binaries and gentlemen, to the real beginning of this presentation. I admit that first part was over the top on purpose. If you're like me, you probably unquestioningly accepted the books and their timeline as immutable truth until I pointed out its flaws to you. That's what happened to me, at least. For me, it was the bit about the hero of time not being remembered in Twilight Princess, and I was really mad that I'd been lied to all that time. I had to rewrite so much of my Ocarina of Time fanfiction to get it accurate. Whether to accept the official books as the canon we've got, or to reject it for contradicting the actual games, is literally the most divisive issue in the entire Zelda fandom, having led to many terrible fights over the years, with the book's supporters calling themselves established science and painting me as the crazy conspiracy person who doesn't deserve to call himself a Zelda fan, and me comparing myself to Galileo. But instead of insulting lots of people so they won't listen to anything I say, let's do something constructive instead. It's easy to say there's no timeline and it's all just legends, or that they never intended to have a timeline, but there certainly is one. The mythic one true timeline we're looking for is actually very complicated and very heavily disputed, especially among experts, with almost as many theories as theorists, and we all disagree with each other over the nuances. However, most of us do agree that almost all the games were all made as prequels and sequels to each other. It's therefore a straightforward matter to construct a perfectly based chronology game by game by stringing them together in the one unambiguous order, by their initial release date. We'll start, of course, with Zelda 1 from 1986. Despite its obtuse old gameplay, it actually has a grain of a lore backstory to it, which I am adapting into a huge fan game prequel to my planned remake. Work in progress. That's actually why I do theorizing. It's because I want my fan games and such to be accurate. The intro begins with, many years ago, Prince Darkness Ganon stole one of the Triforce with power. But because the intro ends with the imperative go find the 8 units link, I figure it was Ganon's theft of the Triforce of Power that occurred many years ago, rather than the entire story being a legend told many years ago. I have a very dubious source backing me up on this headcanon. The eShops and Switch Online descriptions say, Ganon has escaped from the Dark World, suggesting he'd previously been sealed. My fan game, set many years before it, will remain on the timeline because I've spent too much effort writing it to not include it, even if no programming is done and all I have to show it for is an 85-page Google Doc full of scripts. Zelda 2 understandably gets a lot of hate for being an unfair platformer, but underneath that is a great soundtrack and even a decent idea for RPG elements. Zelda 2 takes place many seasons after the first one on Link's 16th birthday, and Animal Crossing confirms that characters' birthdays are the game's release dates. Mishizaki's manga adaptation suggests that the tragedy in its backstory happened 400 years or 17 generations before it. Already a chronology is forming. In my remake of it, I'll turn the platform with RPG elements into an RPG with platforming elements. Time for our first spin-off. The 1989 Game & Watch describes Princess Zelda as Link's sweetheart. Though the end of 2 was the only confirmed Zelink at the time of its release, the cover shows a younger Link than that. Zelda 1 Zelink confirmed, at least for a little while. That's why it's worth it to check the spin-offs, because there you might find your only source for something important. The love lives of fictional characters is serious business. Bonus content. Here's an exclusive peek at my work-in-progress fan games and some associated headcanons about their backstories. I've been writing some of them for over 2 years, so if ever made into actual games, they will be surreptitiously leaked, definitely by someone other than me, to the Internet Archive with zero fanfare. I can't just file the serial numbers off and repackage it as an original property. They're carved so deep into its heart that trying to file them off would basically entail rewriting a new thing from scratch as it falls apart devoid of the context it was meant to be built on. I'm committed. The title screen will say, to Nintendo's legal department, I will not accept your takedown request unless you play the game and attach a legitimate screenshot of your completed ending gallery. 1991. Link to the Past. It was my first Zelda game when I first played it on Switch Online in June 2020. It was originally known in Japan as Triforce of the Gods, and it's a prequel to everything we've seen previously. It says so in a single line on the back of both the American and Japanese boxes, but the Japanese one is much more explicit about it. It says, this game's stage is when Hyrule was still a unified kingdom, a long time before the era when Link was active. That's referring to the first two games being after a long era of decline during which the kingdom broke up. The imprisoning war of its backstory was set in Kagiva's manga to be 600 years before it. The manga is important and has influenced games. We might call it loose canon from which we can draw ideas from. For example, the Rito are based on the Watarara from Himekawa's Ocarina of Time. No, I'm not a hypocrite for citing manga when I reject Historia. 1993, 1998, and 2019, Link's Awakening is a direct sequel to Link to the Past with the same Link, and has cameo appearances by many he's met before. After saving everyone and telling Zelda he was going on hero training in foreign lands, he's just been on a well-deserved relaxing vacation, but was shipwrecked after encountering inclement weather returning to Hyrule in his small boat. Fun fact, the title is a spoiler for the ending. Broadcast in 1995, BSX Zelda on the Teleview. Hyrule Historia actually got BS Zelda and Ancient Stone Tablets mixed up with each other. BSX Zelda acts like a remake of Zelda 1, but it has to be a different thing from the original Zelda 1, because otherwise Adventure of Link wouldn't make sense. It must therefore be long after Zelda 1, because the Armor statues haven't moved in a long time and bad things happened when they did, and the Power Bracelet is stated to have been lost for centuries and was used by an ancient hero. Additionally, the world has become even more desertified. Octo says it should be 300 to 400 years after Adventure of Link. Ancient Stone Tablets was broadcast in 1997, and in it the Hero of Light falls from the sky and confirms Zelda's prophetic dream, which is actually the debut appearance of this ability. It is set 6 years after Link to the Past, and it makes clear that it's concurrently with Link's Awakening. It also retcons killing Ganon to having just sealed him, introduces light arrows to the series, and Link Between Worlds item rental. It was developed by Nintendo and is only forgotten because it doesn't exist anymore, but onto the timeline it goes and shall stay. 1998. Ocarina of Time is the confusing one that tripped up Historia's authors. They had heard from the ancient documents that it was, early in development, intended to be a depiction of Link to the Past imprisoning war, which elements of the 1997 beta build reflect. However, they failed to realize that it was definitely not what we got in the final build of the game. They made an assumption and assumed wrong. If it's still a prequel to Link to the Past, then Twilight Princess is still a sequel to Wind Waker. Historia trying to shoehorn it in with Link dying in the final battle with Ganon makes no sense and in fact violates the entire premise of Link to the Past. Now, I would have chalked Link's tragic death up as an otherwise innocent error due to mere incompetence, but the slanderous things they wrote elsewhere about the Hero of Time and his legacy make me believe that such is not the case. They also said that he regretted never being remembered as a hero in the Child Timeline, when in fact he never said any such thing, and actually lots of people in Twilight Princess remember a hero, like Renato, Ashe, the Gorons, the Light Spirits, and even the texture designer Jack Kirby Crosby. Historia said that he just told the royal family what Ganondorf was going to do, then selfishly abandoned the whole thing as a them problem to go look for Navi, which is out of character for all the characters involved, when the king already didn't believe Zelda, and in Twilight Princess there's evidence that he clearly took an active role in bringing together the other races because the Gorons treasure his bow, the same bow from Majora's Mask. No wonder he was never remembered if they say he didn't do anything heroic. And so with all that in mind, as I walked down the road in my neighborhood, stroking my beard as I listened to Metroid music, I reached a frightening conclusion. I therefore conclude that in fact, Hyrule Historia's authors killed Link themselves. You heard me there, I am accusing this literal book of committing cold murder of a video game character, because they seem to believe that he did not do anything to deserve being remembered as a hero. The Downfall timeline and the Hero's Shade were caused by one and the same event, obfuscated under a shroud of lies. And Ganon was actually innocent here, merely framed for Link's death, so it makes sense why Historia's alibi makes no sense. The entire alleged timeline branch was made up just to cover the murder they committed. And I will further posit afterwards, just a headcanon, that Zelda was the one who commissioned the vague mural to go in the center of the new castle town to honor Link's deeds as a hero. This is a backstory event of major importance. And one last thing. Encyclopedia calls the Hero's Shade a Stalfos, but he's not a skeleton. He's a ghost. You can merely see his bones through his transparent flesh. Majora's Mask is on the Child Timeline. After Time Link defeated Ganondorf as an adult, he was sent back in time to avert this future, which means most of Ocarina of Time is not on the same branch. The only person who experienced Majora's Mask after Ocarina of Time was Link himself. Navi left him because he is an experienced adventurer now and no longer requires her assistance, so he and Zelda worked on bringing together the other races to catch Ganondorf. Then, after some months of that, he got an Epona and went to the woods to look for Navi, which is when Majora's Mask is. Majora's Mask's main gimmick is a 3-day groundhog loop that Link has to keep rewinding so that the falling moon doesn't crush him. As Link repeats this loop and gathers masks, he forms relationships with the people of Termina by impersonating their loved ones, and commits bank fraud by bringing his bank account back with him in order to withdraw funds that he had not yet deposited. Every time Link rewinds the loop, he's abandoning another Termina to its terrible fate. All of the side quests are done in-game on different turns around the loop, but the end credits show the outcomes of all of them together. Perhaps Link canonically redid them all in one unseen victory lap, or the Goddess of Time collapsed them all into a single ending. It's quite likely Link's victories are stored in his masks, based on the remains. Whatever the method is of combining all the turns around the loop into a single ending, Link is clearly alive and Termina is a physical place, because despite a confusingly large amount of people claiming otherwise, including MatPat and partially including Encyclopedia, which appears to say Termina is a dream of Skull Kid, although that might just be a metaphor for how he corrupted it, the final scene of the end credits shows Link returning safely through the woods on Epona with all his items. 2001. The two oracles are linked by the password system, so really they're one game split across two cartridges. As of making this presentation, I have not yet finished playing them all the way. I'm about halfway through the first quest in each. They have hands down the least subtle foreshadowing in the whole series, and are before Link's Awakening. Everything in Link's Awakening is now retroactively based on a memory from these. Marin is a composite of many girls Link meets. Oracle of Ages has a segment where his items are stolen because he didn't write his name on them, and Awakening opens with Link having written your name on his sword and shield. Encyclopedia jumbled the orders of the oracles in Awakening in an attempt to explain why Zelda introduces herself to Link, but that's not actually not a contradiction in the first place. Her words are really more like, "It is I," the exact same as how Time Zelda reveals herself to have been Sheik all along. Also remember, despite the manual art of Link in each game not reflecting this, Ancient Stone Tablets shows that it's a 6-year gap after Link to the Past. Ocarina was 7, and nobody bats an eye at Zelda introducing herself. 2002. Four Swords was described as the earliest tale by Onuma at its release, and was released with the new features in the port of Link to the Past. The Palace of the Four Sword, located inside Ganon's pyramid, has the Four Sword in 4 pieces in it. This suggests Ganon was sealed in it at the end of Four Swords' adventure, and then kept it close to him so nobody could use it against him in the Imprisoning War. From this, I conclude the Master Sword must have been made as a replacement during the Imprisoning War. Wind Waker says in its prologue that it's long after Ocarina's adult ending, after Ganondorf broke out of his seal and there was no hero to stop him because Zelda had sent him away. Oops, why did Zelda ever get the Triforce of Wisdom? Ganondorf's clearly a lot cleverer than she is. Though the hero chosen by the gods has left the time stream, a new boy is badass enough to make the gods choose him. We actually do have a close year count. A great artist's gravestone on Windfall Island says 831 to 894 on it, which is not a reference to any real-life historical person. Wolfram Alpha's search does not give anyone with those dates. For 1831 to 1894 instead, it gives no great artists, but a Civil War sailor, an Irish-American businessman turned politician, a Russian businesswoman, a controversial Union general, and Nebraska's first House representative. These are genuine Hylian years we have here. TotK's figurine description isn't in all the other languages, says a great artist was his father. So Wind Waker's date is therefore 894 or pretty close to it. I don't know why this important tidbit isn't in the English version, but perhaps it's because Americans are too soft to be exposed to any mention of gravestones. The more important question remains, what are we counting these years from? It's probably not the Great Flood. Societies don't usually reset their year counters with a major natural disaster. Year reckonings, unless it's counted from the reign of the current emperor, which is unlikely here considering the magnitudes of the numbers unless they simply kept using King Davnus' era after the flood, are otherwise always applied retroactively by historians for their own convenience, like how the Christian calendar replaced the Roman calendar, or how archaeologists years before present are counted backwards from 1950, when the hydrogen bombs made radiocarbon dating forever unreliable. Now, because I'm a historian, and I want to be clear about dates on different branching timelines, I would like to propose this system to count dates for the Zelda series. With its year 0 encompassing the moment of timeline branch divergence sometime in late February or early March, we have AT for adult timeline, BT counting backwards for before timeline, and CT for child timeline. The separate 2D games can continue the alphabet with DT, a tongue-in-cheek reference to the downfall timeline. 2004. Four Swords Adventure is clearly meant to displace Ocarina as the Link to the Past prequel, with its 6 maidens, the same map layout with the same location names and dungeons, and the origin of Ganon's Blue Trident and Blue Pig form, and you even meet the original creators of Bombos and Quake. Four Swords Adventure also had a Japan and Korea only bonus game called Tetra Trackers, which is also known as Navi Trackers, despite not featuring Navi, which is about the pirates teaching Wind Waker Link how to be a pirate by disguising themselves as different colored links. Additionally, Four Swords Adventure is almost immediately after Four Swords. The first half of the intro refers to the first time Vati was sealed with generic terms like hero and young boy. Ages later, for Four Swords, it refers specifically to Princess Zelda and Link, whose name you're unable to change here. Basically, Four Swords Adventure is very soon, within a couple of years at most, after Four Swords, with the same Link and Zelda. There was a brief period of peace, but it ended suddenly. I don't know how Historia managed to mess it up this badly. Minish Cap is the clear prequel to the Four Swords trilogy, being the origin of Vati, the Four Sword, and Link's Green Hat, as well as numerous other recurring characters. It's not the same thing as the first fight with Vati described in Four Swords Adventure, because that had Vati kidnapping many beautiful girls from their homes, which in Minish Cap he didn't. It also can't be on a timeline before Ocarina of Time, because Malon sings Epona's song in it, which was composed by Time Malon's mother. Unless you're saying Malon's mother is hundreds of years old? What a silly suggestion. Although Talon remarks that the Gerudo mask reminds him of his wife, everyone knows that a 1999 interview said Gerudo's children are always full-blooded Gerudo, so I guess that throws out any possibility that Malon's mother is the 400-year-old twin Rova. The description of Gerudo biology suggests to me that they reproduce by parthenogenesis like salamanders. Twilight Princess was said by Onuma in 2007 interview to take place some hundreds of years after Ocarina of Time, on the child timeline because it shows Ganondorf being executed by 6 sages who look weird and ghostly. However, that interview was mistranslated. It's meant to be 100 and some years, so I long liked to say 130 CT with no direct source. Princess Zelda in the manga says Ganondorf was executed almost 100 years ago, so we have a range in the vicinity of 100 or 110 years for the year count. I've mentioned this at least twice in this presentation, but Twilight Link is a direct descendant of Time Link, and who else? The love lives of fictional characters is serious business. Time to briefly become Maury Povich. Perhaps Zelda, but that would make Twilight Link a prince, as well as Zelda's cousin, which everyone who isn't still misinterpreting that one line in Link to the Past is pretty sure he isn't. Though Time Link may have loved Zelda in whatever form she took, this was a one-sided crush, as she ruined his entire life, didn't want to hold a conversation with him longer than a music lesson and a quote about rivers of friendships, and finally she couldn't wait to permanently rid the time stream of him at the cost of dooming Hyrule. Zelda, you are not the mother. Perhaps Saria. She is technically a lot older than she looks, but she looks like a child, so unfortunately for legal reasons I'll have to veto any possibility that Saria is the mother. We get to a dangerous close call because Twilight Link lives in a treehouse, but thankfully the manga makes very clear that he only moved there very recently. Perhaps Ruto. Wind Waker confirms that Zora and Hylian interbreeding is possible by a Rito said to be descended from a Hylian postman. Unfortunately, to the disappointment of my marine biologist friends, the ship is sunk by the fact that Twilight Link is not a fish. Link did not seem very interested when she told him they were engaged. This was a one-sided crush. Ruto is not the mother. Naburu, Anju, Bombchu Lady, Harem of Time is probably a valid interpretation somewhere, but that doesn't answer the question. Anyways, the answer is clearly Malon. Twilight Link owns an Epona horse and works on a ranch. That's probably the most likely. It's not the same ranch, it's a different ranch in a different region of the land. 2007 was a big year for Zelda games, with one underrated mainline and 2 nearly forgotten spin-offs. Link's crossbow training is the closest thing you'll get to a Twilight Princess 2. When Midna broke the mirror, she also broke Link's heart, so now he's bought a crossbow and contemplated what to do with it. Tingle's balloon fight stars the same Tingle from Wind Waker, and they're the same age, so this must be what he was put in jail for. Phantom Hourglass is a direct sequel to Wind Waker, opening with a recap of it. Wind Waker Link is hanging out with the pirates. This has Zora scales, Ruto crowns, and even real River Zora Knights on the adult timeline, when the Zoras were previously thought to have all evolved into Rito. Fun fact, Bellum's theme is the intro of Light World Dungeon, foreshadowing because the real antagonist of it is the Temple of the Ocean King. I really like the drawing mechanic in Phantom Hourglass. Ignore this slide if you want, but I'll take a brief detour for the Tingle duology, which feature modern technology like trains and video games, in what we assume to be a setting 1,000 years after the adult timeline over a drained ocean. They're pretty weird. One of them is Tingle trapped in a fanfiction of himself, and the other is a parody of The Wizard of Oz with a time-travel dating sim. 2009. Spirit Tracks is 100 years after Phantom Hourglass, after the pirates founded New Hyrule Kingdom in the land of Lacomo. King Daphnis is sighing because he specifically told them to make something other than Hyrule. A thing to note is that Tracks Link is most probably not related to Wind Waker Link. Old Man Nico only says he looks like his old friend, not that he is related. 2011. Skyward Sword bills itself as the prequel to everything in the series. However, its least subtle foreshadowing at the end is to Ocarina of Time, and makes no such in-game indication towards Minish Cap being next down the line, which irks me. I am of the belief that yes, there was a first hero like from Himekawa's prequel chapter, because there's at least 2 allusions to one. The sailcloth description said the goddess made one for her chosen hero, and Fi tells of a hero who collected arrows with his shield. It makes Hylia's motivation more meaningful if she is motivated by love to reincarnate as a mortal, instead of a vague using the Triforce, because Zelda was never in a position to use the Triforce if she was asleep the whole time. She was just manipulating Link into being motivated by love. Skyward Sword features time travel heavily, but carelessly forgets to branch a time paradox at the end. It can't decide if it wants to be a stable loop or a split ending. Me and other theorists, we've pondered and haven't been able to come up with any satisfactory explanation for Skyward Sword's inconsistent time travel wackiness, so my solution is just to arrest Link for it in a post-credits scene. This is exactly what I believe happens. The cop wears a Battenberg pattern vest and a British helmet. 2013. A Link Between Worlds, despite at first glance a bit of apparent contradiction with the ending of A Link to the Past regarding what happens to Ganon and the Triforce, was titled in Japan Triforce of the Gods 2, with Triforce of the Gods 1 having been linked to the past, so here it goes, with Sazral's deleted dialogue putting it 6 generations after, which me and Dokami carefully estimated to be 167 years. The discrepancy in the number of sages between these games, 7 plus Zelda here, and 7 including Zelda elsewhere, is easy to explain because the extra one is Impa, who wasn't present in Link to the Past. I headcanon that the 4 links from Four Swords Adventure are some of the distant ancestors of the sages. The retcon from Ganon being killed to being sealed has been a thing since Ancient Stone Tablets, so nothing new here. The splitting of the Triforce could have happened after the Oracles. It is half set in the alternate dimension of Lorule, an inverse of Hyrule, which looks and sounds a lot like the Dark World, but it is not the same place as the Dark World because it has its own sacred realm, and you even visit the original sacred realm at the end. Stay tuned for part 3 of this presentation, because Lorule has a bigger role in connecting the whole timeline than you'd expect for a 3DS game of its caliber. Hint, Ganon's spirit is now sealed in Lorule. 2014. Hyrule Warriors is not considered canon, and the devs explicitly said that. But let's do a thought experiment anyways, because it's too fun to just throw away, with lots of my favorite character designs. If this spin-off were canon, then where would it go? Many might jump to a conclusion saying it's on multiple branches at once and brings them together, but actually that's just cross-timeline knowledge brought in as everything is returned to its own timeline when it's done. The beginning parts of the game best fit on the child timeline based on the status of Ganondorf, featuring special alternate time travel versions of Skyward Sword, Ocarina of Time, and Twilight Princess. I actually haven't beaten this game yet, but from what I know of this is how I think it goes. If it doesn't make any sense, that's on purpose. Hyrule Warriors is fun and has a lot of great character designs, even if, ultimately, it does not fit on the main timeline. And the opposite problem happens with Triforce Heroes, which despite all the cute outfits is often considered to be the worst game in the series. It has a minimal plot and no good story connection to any other, but still features on official chronologies. Honestly, Triforce Heroes' plot is so minimal there's no unambiguous connection other than an interview with the director saying it's a sequel to Link Between Worlds, which was said not 3 days after an interview where the same guy refused to confirm the timeline placement. Its art style was originally going to be Link Between Worlds, but that was replaced by Toon Links with randomized voices, removing that connection. If Triforce Heroes can be canon, then so can't Hyrule Warriors. That's a Bostonian expression of agreement that confirms an affirmative statement by negating the unspoken assertion. The New York Times Speaking American Dialect quiz assures me I'm Bostonian, but Bostonians think I'm British, and Brits think I'm a radio announcer from the 1930s. Fun fact about me, I was once a voice actor and animatic as a British radio announcer. I would say things in my cooking show like, first, you get a saucepan. What was I talking about? I'm classifying Triforce Heroes on Tingle Duology tier with its weirdness. Its setting and the garbled legends do match the late adult timeline. Brief detour, Cadence of Hyrule is very impossible to place on the Zelda timeline, with alternate endings and such contradicting each other ambiguously as a sort of AU to Ocarina of Time, Four Swords Adventures, Zelda 1, and Minish Cap. The devs did say in an interview on Twitch that they had an intended place for it on the timeline, but they declined to say what it was. All we know is it's connected to Crypt of the Necrodancer, and both of their ends lead into each other with the golden loot. Breath of the Wild is intentionally ambiguous in its timeline placement by being so far away from everything else. Even its backstory was 10,000 years ago, and Ocarina of Time, according to the Zora Stone Monument, was even longer before that. It acts like kind of a soft reboot for the series. So which timeline is it on? The adult timeline comes to mind because of Rito and Koroks. However, Hyrule's been flooded there. However, there is even some evidence for a drained sea, the presence of rock salt even at the tops of the tallest mountains, whose description says it crystallized from an ancient sea. However, Breath of the Wild still has structures from Skyward Sword present, which should also not be as good of conditions as they are after having spent thousands of years submerged. Some evidence for the child timeline includes the topology of Castletown leading straight to the Castle Gate, the Gorons having advanced mining technology, and the Zoras having beautiful architecture like in Twilight Princess. In addition, Jack Kirby Crosby's mural returns. It shows Zora and Rito coexisting on the child timeline. Even the 2D timeline gets a share, with Lionel's and the yellow stripe on the edge of the iconic hat, but those are minor. One common suggestion for how this could be is that Hyrule Warriors merged up other timelines, even though 1, it's not canon, and 2, that's not how it works there anyways because everybody returns to their own timelines at the end. Another possibility, remember my solution to Skyward Sword time travel from a few slides ago? Where there Link was arrested by the Time Police, whom he initially confused for the Horny Police, I humorously invert the situation for the end of Adventure of Link. A tinfoil suggested in late 2022 suggests that Zelda the First from Zelda 2 was the one who merged all the timelines. Here, I provide a funny reason why, as Link is about to be arrested by the Horny Police, whom he initially confuses for the Time Police. My Adventure of Link fan remake will actually involve a section of time travel and responsibly managing multiple confusing branches in order to recover an artifact destroyed centuries ago, so that's why Link's first assumption is that it's the Time Police. But surely it would be irresponsible to use my own Skyward Sword fanfiction as my only evidence for a merged timeline placement, so let's move on. 2020. Age of Calamity is a great source of character development for the champions, but unfortunately doesn't help place the growing Wild trilogy any more precisely on the series timeline, as the 100% completion reward is the set of clothes from the non-canon Hyrule Warriors. Their item description calls them prized possessions of many heroes across many worlds. There is no other franchise with a conflicted continuity like this. The creators say, we don't really care about continuity. The fans say, but surely there must be a continuity. A third party licensed by the creators but unconnected to them say, here's a continuity. The expert fans each say different versions of, no, that's wrong, and I have copious evidence for my continuity. And the rest of the fans say, obey the books, you crazy heretics. Age of Calamity disappointed lots of people at its release who were expecting the events 100 years ago, but the opening bait and switched them into an alternate timeline parallel to the memories. Then, spoilers, the champion's descendants are brought back in time from the original timeline, because the Sheikah have access to multiple timelines. Not quite as confusing as the first Hyrule Warriors. For those who do find it confusing, or simply refuse to believe me that time travel makes a timeline branch, it's actually very similar to the timeline shenanigans at the end of Ocarina. Zelda with her divine power sends a cute blue-eyed thing back in time to warn her past self about what Ganon is going to do, and creates an alternate history. It doesn't irreconcilably contradict Breath of the Wild, because it explicitly does not lead directly to it. But then, the champion's descendants are brought back from the future, from the original timeline branch because they recognize Link from the Divine Beasts. And at the end, they return to their own time, leaving a new branch where the champions live, and where I'm writing a fan game starring the son of Link and Mipha. Convoluted, I know, but unlike the first Hyrule Warriors, its internal consistency checks out. And to clarify a couple things, there are, as you know, 2 Terracos in Age of Calamity. The one from the future arrived, and the one who was already there got turned evil by the malice that tagged along. So, shouldn't there likewise be 2 Links on the child timeline? The answer is no. The time travel in Ocarina of Time only transports Link's consciousness into his past or future body, which is why he ages and de-ages. He gets the Triforce of Courage when he meets Zelda and commits to changing the timeline. A visual pun is shown when Terrako commits to changing the timeline. It's surrounded by butterflies, representing the butterfly effect. Age of Calamity only has one possible inconsistency with Breath of the Wild, and that's just an inconsistency with something creating a champion made up. The claim that Link got the Master Sword at age 12. Nobody in Breath acts as if that's the case because Link's claim to fame is deflecting a guardian with a pot lid, which is what Link King first noticed him for, rather than having the literal Master Sword. This is not too long before the memories because when Link met Daruk before the deflection. It makes more sense for Link to have acquired the Master Sword mere days before recruiting the champions. In Age of Calamity, Link was busy at the Battle of Hyrule Field on the day he would have gotten it, postponing his sword getting. It all fits. And finally, which with much waiting, Tears of the Kingdom, long known only as the sequel to Breath of the Wild before its title was revealed, and then the meaning of the title was made clear when the price was revealed. As I'm writing this before its release, I can't say anything certain about its plot because we come up with new theories every single day, and then they are all appended when a new trailer or leaked art book comes out. And it is not the subject of this presentation. Stacking up all the evidence we have, the Wild Trilogy can end up on the child timeline. Probably, question mark, nobody will agree. I know theorists who put it on adult too, but it should go on child. Most casual fans, if they don't believe in a merger, put it on child, which ironically means they're vehemently anti-Astoria without even knowing how the first Four Swords adventure is. I don't care. All I want is that it doesn't lead to the beginning of Skyward Sword. It better the F40PH not lead directly to the beginning of Skyward Sword. The Ouroboros in the logo isn't one snake eating its tail representing a time loop, it's two snakes eating each other's tails representing two forces in eternal conflict with each other. If there's a time circle, I'll retire from theorizing. Bonus content. This was my original Tears of the Kingdom placeholder title for the earlier draft of this script. You can really tell how serious it is by the blurry image and my choice of font. The tears in Tears of the Kingdom in this case represents me crying about my theories debunked. I wanted Link to be corrupted by malice and turning into a Gerudo in a 10,000-year time loop to be a new host for Ganon's spirit. Maybe I'll retcon my Adventure of Link remake for Ganon's minions to want to turn Link into a new body for Ganondorf, instead of just sacrificing his blood to revive Ganon. But after all that, that's where we're at, in its uncondensed glory with the spin-offs on it. What I've just put together is an extended version of the popular timeline with two completely separate lines for 2D and 3D games. This is because the Four Swords sub-series shouldn't be separated, and it is before Link to the Past, which is not after Ocarina of Time, which is after Skyward Sword. I call it the based timeline because so many theorists agree with it. If anything past here is too controversial for you, I hope you take the based timeline to heart. Here it is uncluttered without some of the games considered spin-offs. Many before me have reached this stage, but after this point we all don our respective foil-lined apparel to disagree over the nuances and go to make different conclusions from it. And that's why theorizing is fun. Zelda's a series of puzzle games, and what bigger puzzle can it have than one that encompasses the entire series? There will always be very many different theories to connect it all up so that there can be a single creation event, be it Lauren Instu creatively using Minish Cap's Bell ending to cause a split, or Octo running Minish Cap off the back of Twilight Princess. Me and GWJ came up with one that is really meaningful and fun, with good reasoning for its big assumptions. The words are adapted in part from his original 2022 document. Lorule has a hero like Link, Ravio. Unlike Link, Ravio is not courageous enough to stand before Hilda and Yuga to prevent their plans to take Hyrule's Triforce. Ravio took a route of lesser danger by sneaking himself into Hyrule himself to recruit Link, and something Lorule doesn't have that Hyrule does is a Master Sword. While Link is adventuring in Lorule, he discovers Master Ore, which the blacksmiths are able to use to enhance the Master Sword. Interestingly, all of the Master Ores are found in Lorule, while none can be found in Hyrule. The reason for this is pretty simple. Hyrule already used its 4 pieces of Master Ore to forge the Master Sword, while Lorule never created one. We do not find a Master Sword while in Lorule, and Ravio does not carry a sword. We don't even visit the area of the Lost Woods where the Master Sword is found. If we think of Lorule as if it were Hyrule, how would one explain a hero that lacks courage and does not have a Master Sword to wield? The answer is simple. Skyward Sword never happened in Lorule. There is no counterpart to Goddess Hylia, which helpfully also settles any debate on what a hypothetical Lorule goddess would be called. There is no Loria, Laurel, Loretta, or Lilia, and definitely no Lolia either. Skyward Sword's events only occurred due to Hylia's actions and plans. Because of Hylia, Zelda awakens as the Goddess Reborn and ropes Link into tempering his soul to upgrade the Goddess Sword and become worthy to wield the Triforce. This is the first hero in history and the origin of the spirit of the hero that all future Links share. The Link in the Himekawa prequel chapter was just a swordsman Hylia fell in love with, which is why she chose to reincarnate as a mortal alongside him. Her plan makes more sense if that was her motivation, because how could Zelda have intended to use the Triforce if she was asleep and Link was the one questing? To continue, if there is no Hylia, there is nobody to seal Demise away, to coax Link into tempering his soul to save Zelda, or create the Master Sword. Lorule also has a princess like Zelda, Hilda, and unlike Zelda, Hilda does not appear to have the magical abilities Zelda has. She carries a staff like Yuga that she uses to perform magic, and she also uses Ravio's bracelet to send Link and Zelda home to Hyrule. She is never seen performing magic of her own, while Zelda is shown being able to create the light arrows for Link while she was cursed to be a painting in Lorule. The Lorulian royal family destroyed this realm's Triforce to prevent conflict over it. Meanwhile, in Hyrule, the Triforce was handed down by the Golden Goddesses to Hylia to protect it, and it is in this duty that she sets into motion the events leading up to Skyward Sword. Destroying the Triforce is something antithetical to her existence and out of character for all the characters involved. Hilda not having the benefits of being a goddess reincarnated would make the idea of destroying the Triforce more plausible. Without a counterpart to Hylia, it must be asked how Lorule would survive Demise's invasion. The solution is that Demise simply does not exist here. Hyrule, and by extension Lorule, are created on the principles of balance as symbolized by the Triforce itself and the constant oscillation of the powers of good and evil. Without Hylia as the paragon of light, there can't be a Demise, paragon of darkness. In addition, we don't see Lorule as a state that suggests Demise exists. If the Triforce were destroyed, there would be nothing preventing a demon invasion from completely overtaking Lorule or from being outright destroyed. But what we see in Lorule is a realm that is slowly decaying due to the lack of Triforce, and humans turning into demons from their own negative emotions. The game presents Lorule as what happens when Hyrule loses its Triforce, and it shows how humanity will fall without the Triforce, becoming corrupted by their own greed and lust for power. It is not Demise that defeats humanity in Lorule, it's humanity itself. In Skyward Sword, Demise's goal is to rule the world with the Triforce, making it into a monster-infested hellscape ruled by the Demon Tribe. Lorule was shown decaying into a dark world where the people all transform into demons with no Triforce to govern the land, so the transformation of the world into a demon world involves the outright removal of the Triforce rather than using it. Demise doesn't need the wish, he wants to destroy the Triforce and consume its power in order to destroy Hyrule. Now, it's very interesting that Fi mentioned that Demise has had different forms in different eras. This seemingly suggests that Hyrule is not the first land to have been menaced by Demise, so where is he from? I really hope Tears of the Kingdom doesn't directly lead into the beginning of Skyward Sword, or else it'll completely destroy the conclusion for this theory. Common imagery in A Link Between Worlds is the mirrored relation between Hyrule and Lorule. In addition to the inverted Triforce, Lorule itself is often presented like the reflection in water. The alphabets are also upside down. Hilda's theme is Zelda's Lullaby inverted on a staff, and part of Lorule Castle's theme is Hyrule Castle backwards. The Ballad of the Goddess from Skyward Sword is Zelda's Lullaby backwards, and it makes a cameo appearance here covered by the Milk Bar Band. Our big assumption, with copious aforementioned evidence, is that in the same way Lorule is a mirror world to Hyrule, its timeline is also mirrored, running generally in the reverse direction to Hyrule's. They do temporarily sync up when the doors between them are open, which to use highway terminology is called a wrong-way concurrency. If we take the timeline in Lorule to flow opposite to Hyrule's, forward advancement in Lorule's timeline would correlate with backward movement in Hyrule's timeline. Lorule's past lines up with Hyrule's future, and Lorule's future lines up with Hyrule's past. Now, let's put the pieces together. We have Demise with an inverted Triforce motif and hints to a much larger backstory, and Link Between Worlds was the very next game released after. Lorule had no Skyward Sword on its own, and a reverse timeline with Ganon's spirit trapped on it. The answer is simple. I present the reversed Lorule timeline. Our conclusion, with evidence to back it up, and no more far-fetched than some others, is to join up the two halves of the widely agreed base timeline, is that Ganon comes back and becomes the recurring villain for Lorule, consumes its Triforce, and later invades Hyrule at the beginning of its timeline as Demise with his inverted Triforce symbol, because Demise really has conquered time itself. This treats Lorule's reverse time stream as a time travel branch. Skyward Sword makes no particular foreshadowing to Minish Cap, but a lot leading straight to Ocarina of Time. From the creation event, a different set of circumstances led to the founding of Hyrule Kingdom long before Minish Cap, and the creation of the Master Sword with Hyrule's 4 pieces of Master Ore during the Imprisoning War. Demise's invasion caused a split in the timeline, and in the new branch, Skyward Sword happened. Also, a fun thing I would retcon if I were remaking Ancient Stone Tablets is I would make the Hero of Light a descendant of Ravio and Hilda, in sort of a little time circle thing. If you prefer the extended child timeline and put Minish Cap off the back of Twilight Princess, then applying the reversed Lorule theory makes the progression of Ganon's into a very big circle. And speaking of where to put the child timeline in a big freaky circle, whilst revising the script I had the realization of the century, possibly ever. Operating under the recently established assumption that timelines don't have to be parallel in the same direction, I thought perhaps the child timeline might not be straight either, allowing the timeline branches to naturally intersect and merge to create the setup in Breath of the Wild. Diagonal Child Timeline is a 3-word phrase that nobody on Earth has ever put together before. You heard it here first. timelines don't have to be represented parallel on a single dimension. They could intersect naturally with no need for Zelda the First and Adventure of Link to have to break the fourth wall quite so much. The 1958 short story, The Man Who Murdered Muhammad by Alfred Bester, compares alternate timelines to a plate of spaghetti, where you can only move along your own piece, and time travelers are like the sauce who can move across any strand. Time travelers shouldn't be able to alter history to change their own present, only somebody else's future. Physicists commonly say that there are 3 dimensions of space and 1 of time, but that's just because time travel doesn't exist. And if it did, there should be more dimensions of time, with timelines moving at different angles across it. The game 5D Chess with Multiverse Time Travel has timeline traversal as its 5th dimension, though still parallel in the same direction. If timelines don't have that restriction, then what would happen if 2 timelines intersect? They'd crash into each other and cause rifts, I'd assume. You probably are calling me some sort of a crazy bean for suggesting that timelines are capable of crashing into each other like this. I am a time travel researcher, so I've decided that this is how it goes. It's very important to leave an unaltered version of each timeline to prevent grandfathers from arising if a branch is turned back on itself like the reverse low rule does. Under the mechanics in the stories I write, timelines can be steered by powerful sources of chronomancy, and historian-operated time machines are therefore equipped with all sorts of mechanisms to make sure the timelines remain parallel once branched. All time travel back in time, I've decided, is done by making a timeline which contains only your time machine, steering it very carefully back to the point on the original timeline you want to go to, and finally discarding this branch to go onto the new combined branch, which is how I've consistently been depicting it in this presentation by looping backwards. Changing history is just a matter of perspective, so the reason no time travelers from the future have been knocking down your real-life door is just because the timeline path we're currently on is the unaltered one, and to doubt the chances of that is to doubt that we literally exist. Some physicists like to say that a time machine can't go further back than when it was first active, but that would be completely and utterly useless for the purposes of the fiction I like to write, so I declare that it is exactly the opposite. No time machine can go further forwards than when it was last active because the future doesn't exist yet. If it existed, that would mean it's predestined. I'm talking about real life now, not Zelda. Zelda has predestination all the time, but I'd rather not have predestination in real life. Where was I taking this? Zelda Timeline. Yes, here's my timeline with naturally intersecting timelines. Bringing together all my interests, I present the tube map of time, because I've always loved designing subway maps. It's very confusing, I know. Fun thing that my map does, the river divides the 2D and 3D games, with 2.5D in the middle of the water, and weird side-scroller-ish cases on islands. I was inspired by the underground map of elements, which uses its river to separate solids from gases, with bromine and mercury in the middle of the water. Yeah, I think that's enough content for today. I've been writing this presentation for a literal year. Thank you for bearing with me through all this rant. I hope you were able to understand the good parts. Feel free to ask clarifying questions. Let's spread the base timeline, and together we'll smash Hyrule Historia's sway over the general populace as if it were the like, subscribe, and bell buttons. Also, I recorded this in one take.